Hello, Facebook land. I'm going to wait a few minutes for a couple of people to show up. Then I will start yammering. So I'll just kind of vamp right now because I know that there will be some people watching this while it's going on. My reason for doing this is people are sort of freaking out. We're in a really strange place right now, and I just want to talk a little bit about it. I do find it fascinating. Hello, Kathy. So it's a dual Kathy at the moment. At any rate, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the intensity of the energies and some possible things that could be going on in what we're experiencing at this point. And I'm going to start it with actually something that was an email I got from the Washington Post today. And it says, "The pandemic is upending our relationship to space, time, and each other." You'd think I wrote it. And that's just a really good way to frame what is going on right now. Um, Honestly, the way we have been living has hit the end of the line, and we simply cannot go on any further. And it's as if we have had a giant time out called globally, actually. And one benefit I see in this, besides the timeout and and just not continuing to do what you've always done, because quite clearly our the basics of our lives are under complete renovation. If you look at the news all across the country, large gatherings have been canceled. I'm in the New York area. Museums have closed. Broadway, first time in, I believe, history, dark for a month. Um, I've been seeing photos of the subways, basically deserted. Different states have had requests put out canceling things of certain sizes. In my state, the governor has asked that if it's a gathering of 250 or more, that it please be canceled. I understand there are different sizes in different places, and there are some schools are canceling. And it's not so much, if you look at it this way, it's not so much out of fear, it's out of caution and not wanting to spread something because this thing is so weirdly transmittable. Um, I look at what is going on as a gigantic laboratory in proving the butterfly effect. One thing happening on one side of the world causing a tsunami. And oddly, with phrasing is often a butterfly flaps its wings in China and then there's a tsunami somewhere else. Well, how bizarre that that's what's frequently said, because there's a tsunami everywhere, a tsunami of lifestyle readjustment, lifestyle change going on for all of us. And in a sense, moving into astrology a tiny bit, it's as if this is the Jupiter-Neptune sextile with a vengeance. Some weird inchoate thing that is not detectable to the eye, that is coming down through some kind of weird gateway and infiltrating mundane reality, physical reality, everywhere we go. Um, so part of what is happening here from an astrological perspective is really there are things going on right now that are hammering the big crystallizing change aspects that occurred at the beginning of January. Saturn, which rules structures, which rules government, institutions, responsibility, consequences, karma, name it all, met with Pluto, the Lord of death and rebirth, God of regeneration. And this crystallized influences that had been building all of last year. And as I mentioned in this week's podcast, I firmly believe since January 2008, that's really where I start charting it. That's when Pluto moved into the sign of Capricorn, where it currently is. So something got crystallized in January. I was calling it a Phoenix moment. And now there are things occurring that are activating that point. Jupiter, which expands everything it touches, is moving into a meeting with Pluto, which will be exact on April 4th, but we're effectively in it now. So that's expanding the regeneration and collapse and corruption and rot, if you want, component of all of that. And Mars is joining with Jupiter right now. Mars is the masculine drive. Mars is how we move ourselves forward. It's the planet of action. He's the god of war. So he's with this expansive influence, and they're going to be, they're meeting exactly now, and then each of them is going to meet up with Pluto exactly. So essentially, there's this triggering of it's time to move forward on all the big changes. Now, some of these big changes that happened or that crystallized in January involved rethinking, redoing societal programming, ancestral image issues, dealing with your role in your family. This was a huge issue for a lot of people last year, and getting rid of things that don't work anymore and being more yourself and taking more responsibility for yourself. So this is furthering that, but I'm also now seeing, I mean, this wasn't going to come into my consciousness before, but now that we're witnessing it, we're seeing the collapse of government taking responsibility for things or varying approaches to it. Things are happening on local and state levels. Things are happening in some countries. And then there's this gigantic argument going on on the federal level here. So we can't expect government to step in and take care of things. I think we can rightfully expect government not to make it worse, and I think that will be a long-standing consequence out of what is going on right here. I'm just seeing what the comments are. That will be a huge consequence of what is going on right here. And notice how, well, there's a waking up, and there's got to be a personal reason from a bigger picture that we're all being basically sent home to chill for a few weeks. Now, I hear lots of paranoid speculation as to why this is going on, but let's just look from an epidemic point of view. There is a means of containing, or at least slowing, the spread of a contagion by people not hanging out in really large groups of people right now. And I would say that part of this, a factor to consider in this, and there's an astrological component to this as well, and that is being responsible. And here's a personal example. I was supposed to go out of state and be with my 90-year-old mother for a week to help her with stuff. I am personally not worried about what would happen to me flying. I think if I were to get sick, I'd come through it, no problem. Not the slightest bit concerned about personally contracting this. But it occurred to me I could very well be exposed to it and then walk it into her house. And that was not a responsible way of being. And she decided that we will just kind of like postpone this trip. I went to see a doctor today, a retinal specialist. The patient base there is largely shuffling. Okay, these are people who are, for the most part, really, really elderly. I am one of the youngest people who ever shows up there. And a friend who, and I have to be driven because I leave with in no condition to be able to drive. And a friend a neighbor who had taken me decided to sit in the car the whole time I was there, even though it would go on for a long period of time, so as to not potentially expose all these elderly people. He doesn't think he's got it, but he doesn't know, and he didn't want to take any kind of risk. So looking out at what we might conceivably do to other people is, I believe, a component of this. Now, another thing that is going on is that Saturn is at the very last degree of the sign of Capricorn, which is an extremely intense place. I do talk about this a little bit in my Astro Insight podcast for this week, which is up on this Facebook page. It's also up at my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and it's also on YouTube at the Professional Aquarian channel. And whenever a planet is at the very, very last degree of a sign, there's an intensity to it, but there's also sometimes an unpleasant expression of it, or some of the least beneficial ways of it showing itself. So Saturn at the very last degree of Capricorn could have a lot to do with questions of who's being responsible, who's being an adult, who's taking responsibility, who's going to clean things up, and maybe a weakening of it. And I believe there's also a huge last gasp of the old ruling system that we've been seeing going on for a long, long time. And next week, Saturn moves into the sign of Aquarius to test drive that energy until the end of June. It'll spend the next couple of years in Aquarius. And when Saturn first moves into a sign, there is often a hindrance or heavy obligations or distancing. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you, Cheryl. Anyway, sorry. There's often a distancing or something that just separation. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. So Saturn moving into Aquarius, Aquarius dealing with networks, Aquarius dealing with groups, Saturn moving to that. And now what is the phrase you're hearing all the time? Social distancing. Aquarius also has to do with networks, and I would say the Uranian electronic aspect of it is definitely online communication. And even if people might be working remotely using the internet from home to work. And I actually don't see people not having human contact with this, but it is definitely a shift in the way we go about things. Now I have some positive stuff to say about this in a second. Hello. Now, I have a lot about this. The equinox is next week. It's on the 19th, and that's when the sun moves into the sign of Aries. And anytime there's a turning of the wheel and the sun enters the first degree of a cardinal sign, the chart at that moment sets the tone for the next 3 months, kind of like a background program that runs. So I have a talk about the equinox, and I recorded it in advance on video because I thought I was going to be traveling. So it's done early. And it's available at my site. It's nearly 45 minutes long. I will put a link for it in the comments when I get off. I also have a guided visualization, Thriving in Times of Change, that has you work with Saturn and Pluto and review your life and throw a bunch of stuff into a pyre. And there's also one called Working with Pluto. And these, I would say, might be very, very useful because don't think life's going to go back to what it was. I really do think we're in some kind of massive shift in how we deal with resources, how we deal with time, how we deal with our schedules, what we value, and there's a real call to pull back in and take care of your own stuff. I do not see people sitting around staring at the ceiling for the next couple of weeks when they're bivouacked at home or not going out quite as many places. There is an enormous productivity, and you may find that the energy frees up for you to take care of a lot of stuff that's really, really important to you. You just might be very, very surprised. And there's a simplifying, and I would encourage you to use the Four of Pentacles as your defining card. I meant to pull it out. I'll keep talking while I'm looking for it. Four of Pentacles has a guy sitting, holding a pentacle in front of his chest. He's got two under his feet. There's one on his head. Many people will say this is a card of miserliness, but it is a card of extremely mindful expenditure of energy. You're not just, you're very, very careful and mindful about your resources. Here we go. Here he is. Now, in this deck, he's not a particularly friendly-looking guy, but you can be friendly. But there's something here about being really aware of what your resources are and not just letting them drain out of you. Being very, very mindful of what you spend your time, money, energy, emotions on, who you're spending your time with, and making the most of it. Now, I have a real life example of that for everyone as well. I have an acquaintance who has come off, I think maybe his third or fourth surgery for brain cancer. And a dear friend of mine has taken it upon herself to be his caretaker. And she's treating him with enormous compassion and respect and gentleness. And they go out and they do things, but which I expect is going to be changing since they're in Manhattan. I had dinner with them in the last couple of weeks, and she actually has worked her day out so that they listen to a lot of music. Every night they watch a movie or they watch an old TV show. They were working their way through the Twilight Zone. So even though he is physically uncomfortable, even though he can no longer play his own instruments, she's doing something with him every single day so that he tastes life as worthwhile for as long as he possibly can. And I encourage you to use that as a metaphor, all right? What can you do to physically enjoy where you are at that moment? And what can you do to kind of take over some modicum of control of your life and your circumstance? Now, here's one aspect. You'll see lots of talk online about building your immune system. And this isn't necessarily something to do from simply a panicky point of view. But if you think from this perspective of we're all in this together and what's the responsible thing to do, our medical system is about to get tested in terms of capacity. So the more you can take care of yourself, first and foremost, it's better for you. But secondly, you are freeing up space for someone who's in really dire condition, really dire circumstances. So there's almost like a communal Saturn and Aquarius, being responsible for the collective. There's an aspect of you're taking care of yourself makes things a lot easier and better for someone else, rather than just assuming that you can run yourself into the ground and that there will be someone available to tend to your needs. Well, medical care could be kind of at a premium for a little bit. And I'm not saying that in a panicky way. It's just all bets are off, and you can't assume things are going to go the way they're going. Where they have been going, because, again, I really believe that we're heading out someplace else. Now, if you have questions, you can put them in. I have a couple things I want to read to you while I'm going on here. The first is something I put up on Facebook. I took a shot of this post on Instagram. It's by an astrologer named Chani Nicholas, who I believe writes for Oprah's magazine, and she does playlists on Spotify. She has kind of a charmed career, I will say, but she's also extremely good at expressing things to mainstream audiences. And what she says is, this is the time to put all the healing practices that you've studied, invested in, and worked with to use. This moment is the reason why you learned them. Ancient healing arts keep us well when life is relatively normal, but they are essential in moments of crisis and change. Remember to breathe. Put gratitude front and center. Remember to, this is my mistake, but it seems appropriate. Remember to breathe. Put care into everything you do. Excess fear, stress, and worry cause harm to your system and your networks. Wash your hands. Stay home when you can and support those in your community that can't stay home because of work or safety issues. Listen to and learn from folk that have lived with disability and chronic illness. Stay in touch with your loved ones. Stay as relaxed as possible. Stay in joy whenever and for however long you can. And if you find that a challenge, there is, oh, great. Yes, someone's saying she shared this post. Yes. And if you find it a challenge, the tapping solution, Nick Ortner's The Tapping Solution, has a tapping protocol for tapping away anxiety and tapping out fear associated with this virus. I have a link to it on my Patreon page. There's a public post with a bunch of coronavirus resources. That one is there. Also, I will try to remember to put it in the comments directly so you can go straight to it. One other thing I want to read, and I have not shared this online. This was an invocation that was read before the final performance of the Vagina Monologues that I was in a couple of weeks ago. It was an unusual production because usually there are 3 people in the cast and there were 25 women, diverse sexual identifications, diverse ages, diverse ethnic backgrounds, diverse national origin, and a woman who actually was from Bosnia read this invocation, and I asked her for a copy of it. Most merciful of those who show mercy, make this day a day of growth and benefit for us. Grant us openings to undertake actions that we would be pleased to have as companions with us when we leave from this world. I'm going to read that line again. Grant us openings to undertake actions that we would be pleased to have as companions with us when we leave from this world. Keep us from those actions that we have no desire to share our graves or our eternity with. And increase us in the wisdom needed to see and understand the difference between the two. Protect us always from hearts that are not humble, tongues that are not wise, and eyes that have forgotten how to cry. Forgive us for our shortcomings and guide and bless us all. Amen. I can post that in the comments as well because I think some of you are going to want it again. So, I want to do 2 things. This one's going to be relatively short. For those of you who are not, I hope nobody's driving. Okay, if you're driving, don't do this. But if you're not driving, what I would like us to do is to visualize that between us all, wherever we are on the planet, there is a giant cauldron. There's this big cauldron out there, and I invite everyone to beam into the cauldron anything they want to get rid of. Anything at all. If you're panicked about your money, if you're panicked about your health, if you're panicked about your job, if you're pissed off at a government official or 3, any kind of negative energy, fear, lower vibrational, anything having to do with or just the complete uncertainty of where we are and what is happening. I invite you to beam it into this cauldron. And all of our beams are coming in from all the different places where we are, and we're filling this cauldron and filling it, and the cauldron can expand. It can hold anything at all that we dump into it. And if there's anything else just from your life that has something to do with this that you'd like to get rid of, dump it in the cauldron. You can put people in the cauldron. I don't care. Anything you're carrying around in your energy field that is making you uncomfortable, just beam it into the cauldron. Now let's imagine that this cauldron is on a very, very special platform. and I am going to press a button, and we're going to watch this cauldron lower itself into the ground magically until it goes down to the core of the earth, where it can fuel the earth and be transformed into neutral energy. And know that the cauldron is down there. And if you come up with something like 10 minutes ago, darn, I wish I dumped it in the cauldron. The cauldron is still there. You can shoot it into the cauldron in the center of the earth and let that place turn whatever you've shot down there into neutral energy. And I want to leave you with a very simple tool, okay? So you find you're feeling, anytime you find you're going off center, you're hearing too much on the news and it's making you really uncomfortable, you just have vague discomfort, you wake up during the night and go, everything just feels so weird. Here's what I give you to do. There are 3 parts to it. Part 1, this is my space. You're claiming. Part 2, above, below, under your feet, and all around. Any energy that's not mine, go home. If you want to send the energy into the cauldron, you can do that too. This is my space, above, below, and all around. Any energy that's not mine, go home. We're all empaths. We can't get ill because of the level of terror, fear, whatever going on. We're in a massive transition time, and we've been given a giant time out. So for whatever reason, you know, as you're finding your schedule changing in the next week, 2 weeks, whatever, you might just periodically ask, show me another way to look at this, or how does this benefit me, or what can I do with this? And what can I do with this is going to be a big theme of next week, because we have massive, massive working on stuff, influence just coming out. So if you haven't listened to my podcast, please do. And again, I will put links to some of these resources. Any questions real quick before I scoot off? I'll give people a second to type in there. This is going to be saved and put up as a video on the page, so if you want to come back and listen to anything, if I went too fast, if you want to go think about the cauldron again and dump stuff in it. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody typing. It usually shows me when someone is. So I thank you all for showing up. I'll be bounding around the page. Since I will be around, somebody sent me a message thanking me for the podcast and saying, don't have to write back. I imagine you're really busy and you're slammed with clients. Well, actually, since I was planning on traveling, haven't been booking, I'll be around. If you need me, you know where to find me. So be safe, be sane, take really, really good care of yourself, and find something to enjoy every single day. Okay? All right.